Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the US-Asia Institute's Southeast Asia in Focus webinar, 50 Years Later, Youth Diaspora and the Future of US-Vietnam Relations. My name is Tiff Pham, and I'm a program assistant at the US-Asia Institute. For those who have attended our events in the past, welcome back. And for those who are new to the US-Asia Institute, thank you for joining us. USAI is a nonpartisan, United Nations recognized nonprofit with a 46-year track record of building understanding and strengthening ties between the people and governments of the United States and Asia. Today's webinar is part of our Southeast Asia in Focus webinar series. Southeast Asia in Focus offers unique insights into U.S. partnerships with Southeast Asian nations through speakers with firsthand knowledge of the region. I'd now like to introduce our moderator, Anh Hoang. Ms. Hoang is the director of the US-ASEAN Center in Washington, D.C. She oversees strategic relationships with ASEAN member countries, liaisons, the U.S. State Department, NGOs, universities, and industry partners. Ms. Hoang leads and implements the center's flagship program to bolster US-ASEAN economic technology research collaborations. Prior to joining the US-ASEAN Center, she served as the Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Bauer Group Asia, where she managed a diverse client portfolio, including Fortune 500 companies in sectors such as consumer goods, education, and defense. We are grateful to have Ms. Hoang participating in today's discussion. So without further ado, I will pass it over to her to say a few words and introduce our panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tiff, for the kind introductions. Hello, everyone. As Tiffany mentioned, my name is Anh Hoang, and I'm the director of the US-ASEAN Center here in Washington, D.C. It's a public-private partnership between the U.S. State Department and Arizona State University aimed at strengthening U.S. relations with ASEAN nations, including Vietnam. I'm very honored for the opportunity to join you all today for this conversation. So the reason why we are having this conversation today, this year marks a very significant milestone for the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. It's 50 years after the Vietnam War and also 30 years commemorating the formal diplomatic relationship between Vietnam and the U.S. It's a moment for us to not only reflect on the journey that the two countries have come, so far to date, but also look forward and explore how education, youth engagement, and the Vietnamese diaspora are shaping a new chapter in the U.S.-Vietnam bilateral relationship. The U.S. and Vietnam have gone from conflict to growing cooperations across education, trade, to security over the past 50 years. And education and cultural exchange have definitely played a key role in rebuilding trust, reconnecting the Vietnamese diaspora, and deepening the relationship between the two nations. So examples like the Fulbright Scholarship Program, Fulbright University in Vietnam, the Cultural Exchange Initiative like YSEALI, Hubert Humphrey Fellowship, and other collaborative research between Vietnam and the U.S. are creating opportunities for shared understanding and long-term cooperations. At Arizona State University, we have also been very proud to play a part in this progress. We have programs like HEAP, VULI, and Build It, supported by the U.S. government and also the private sector companies to modernize engineering and technical education in Vietnam. We've trained thousands of faculty and leaders and aligned higher education with industry needs. So these partnerships have not only advanced Vietnam workforce innovation capacity, but also deepened the people's to people's ties and also play a critical role in strengthening relationship between the two nations. I hope that the conversation today will explore these themes further and with a particular focus on how youth education and the Vietnamese diaspora will shape the future of this evolving partnerships. We are very honored to be joined today by two distinguished scholars who have bridged history, policy, and lived experience, Dr. Khoi Nguyen and Dr. Diu-Huong Nguyen. I'll briefly introduce their bio and then I'll turn it over to the speakers to make their remarks. So Dr. Khoi Nguyen received his PhD from Nihon University, Tokyo, Japan in 2014 and has since been a research fellow at Hiroshima University and Johns Hopkins University. He taught at Ho Chi Minh City University of Education for more than a decade until 2018 and currently is a research fellow at the U.S.-Vietnam Research Center. He's co-founded and is the co-editor-in-chief of the U.S.-Vietnam Review published online by the Center His writings focus on Vietnamese politics, society, economy, Vietnamese republicanism, and the South China Sea dispute. His most recent publication is The Early Republican Concept of the Nation, Trần Trọng Kim and Vietnam Sử Lược. Dr. Diu-Huong Nguyen received her PhD in history from the University of Washington, Seattle in 2017. She's currently an assistant professor of history at the University of California, Irvine, where she specializes in social and oral history of Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Her forthcoming book, Eve of Destruction, A Social History of Vietnam's Royal City, 1957-1967, explores the lived experiences of residents of Hue during the decade leading up to the Tet Offensive. Prior to her appointment at UCI, she held fellowships and visiting positions at Haverford College and the University of California's Riverside. Her work has been supported by the NEH, ACLS, and the Society of Hellman Fellows, and she has contributed scholarly and public-facing writings in both English and Vietnamese for the New York Times and BBC Vietnamese. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Khoi and Dr. Hoang, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Khoi to make his remarks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the US-Asia Institute. Thank you, Tiffany Pham, for inviting me to speak at this webinar. And thank you, Ms. Anh Hoang, for your role in moderating this webinar. It's an honor to discuss a history that is both deeply personal for many and strategically critical for our two nations. My work often delves into the evolution of legal thought in Vietnam and its broader geopolitical context, including the influence of international power. And today I will share my point of view from my article, U.S. Foreign Aid to Vietnam, a 50-year historical analysis, and which offers a look at how the U.S. foreign aid has shaped the ties between our two nations. So today we will journey through 50 years of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship, not just as a story of government, but as a story of people, of refugee families, and a new strategy for the next generations. So I will explore the three key areas: the historical evolution of the U.S. aid to Vietnam, its impact on youth and the diaspora, and the strategic challenges that define the future of the U.S.-Vietnam relations. The first content I want to present is the post-war era, from conflict to compassion. The post-war era I mean here is from the 1975 to 1995. Let's begin in 1975. The end of the war left Vietnam isolated. At that time, the General Secretary Lê Duẩn ties Vietnam fed to the communist economy without needing markets, and therefore without needing Western markets. He tied Vietnam fed to the Soviet Union, and without anticipating that the Soviet Union would disappear after 50 years. And the U.S. imposed a trade embargo and severed diplomatic ties. But beneath the official silence, the first form of American aid to Vietnam was humanitarian. Following the fall of Saigon, the initial focus was on the urgent humanitarian relief. Programs like Operation Baby Leaf provided safety for thousands of Vietnamese orphans, airlifting them to the U.S. More significantly, the humanitarian operation, the SO program, launched in 1918, facilitated the resettlement of former South Vietnamese officials and individuals from re-education camps. Organizations like the International Rescue Committees, CIREX, PBSOS, and so on, played a crucial role. The International Rescue Committee resettled over 18,000 refugees in 1975 alone. So the effort addresses immediate needs and importantly laid the groundwork for Vietnamese American diaspora. This wasn't just a foreign policy, it was the formation of a new community. This aid focused on pupil and resettlement laid the foundation for the Vietnamese American diaspora, a community whose story is now intrinsically linked to the US-Vietnam relationship. So the new chapter of the US-Vietnam relations is from 1995 to now. That's a partnership with untapped potential from my point of view. The normalization of relation in 1995 began a new chapter. The US aid shifted to strategic development. Through USAID, America invested Vietnamese economy uh, and public health with real successes, trade boom, and cooperation with healthcare, public health from HIV to COVID-19 recently saved many Vietnamese lives. The normalization of diplomatic relations in 1995 marked a shift in U.S. aid from emergency relief to strategic development with geopolitical calculation. And the key areas of focus included economic modernization. The U.S. aid supported Vietnam transition to market economy, contributing to its rapid economic growth and governance and securities programs. American offer many programs to strengthen Vietnam's institutional framework and security cooperation, particularly in response to regional dynamics like China expansionism in the South China Sea. And the healthcare initiative is very important. The U.S. aid addressed public health challenges such as HIV and COVID-19, enhancing Vietnam's healthcare infrastructure. Recently, the Peace Corps program with young Americans now teaching English in Vietnamese high school is a powerful symbol for reconciliation. However, if we look closer, especially in the crucial area of education and technology, I think the U.S. aid has been surprisingly weak and unsystematic. The most significant program was the Vietnam Education Foundation, the VEF, where Miss Anh Hoang here is due to be a key figure. While it was successful, training over 600 PhD and master students, it was funded by the money that the Vietnamese government paid to clear the old Republic of Vietnam's debt. But when that program ended in 2016, it was not replaced. Now, so we compare this to China. In 2022, China announced a plan to grant over 1,000 government scholarships to Vietnamese students in just 5 years. And before 2022, I cannot count a massive program of Chinese scholarship granted to to Vietnamese students. The United States has no comparable land-scale scholarship program like that. We are falling behind in the competition for Vietnam's next generation of leaders, scientists, and innovations. That's my view. By 2024, the US has become Vietnam's largest trading partner, reflecting the success of the strategic partnership. However, the US aid has been criticized as fragmented and less systematic compared to aid from countries like China, particularly in building long-term technological and educational capacity and influence. So the next content I want to present is strategic imbalance, a missing comprehensive strategy between the US and Vietnam relation. This gap in educational investment point to a much larger problem. The United States lack a comprehensive long-term strategy for Southeast Asia, not only Vietnam, and therefore for Vietnam. Our American policies are often reactive, designed for short-term objectives rather than a long-term vision. China, in contrast, approached Southeast Asia with a powerful, comprehensive strategy. For example, it building the Trans-ASEAN Railway Network, binding the region infrastructure to its own. It used trade, investment, economic cooperation, and economic coercion as tools of influence, and it applied constant pressure through gray zone tactics in the South China Sea, using its overwhelming military power to create tension without triggering open conflict. So China's goal is very clear to methodically turn Southeast Asia to its own strategic backyard. The United States simply does not have a comprehensive counter strategy like that. Our approach is fragmented. We talk about the Indo-Pacific, but without a coherent plan for Southeast Asia, the heart of the region. The strategy remains incomplete. So now we look back to the future of the U.S.-Vietnam relation. The future of the U.S.-Vietnam relations face a potential challenges, particularly with the cessation of the USAID operation in 2025 under President Donald Trump in 2025, or the U.S. aid operation in Vietnam are terminated to reduce the government spending and prioritize the U.S. domestic needs. So this could disrupt the ongoing projects in education, health, and infrastructure, which are critical for Vietnam development. It's weakened the strategic partnership between the U.S. and Vietnam, particularly in countering China's regional influence. It forced Vietnam to seek alternative aid from partners like China, potentially shifting the geopolitical balance in Southeast Asia. So it has a geopolitical implication here. The cessation of the US aid could reduce the US soft power in the region, creating a vacuum for China to fill. This underscores the need for sustainable aid models that balance humanitarian and geopolitical goals. So my recommendations is that I think the US should re-examine its strategies to ensure long-term sustainability, especially developing a systematic aid program in education to compete with other regional powers and to remain the U.S. influence. The next content is a call for action, building a strategic future. So the question is that what is the path forward if the U.S. is to build a true strategic and enduring partnership with Vietnam and the rest of ASEAN? We must move beyond ad hoc policies. We need a strategy that is as comprehensive as China's. This requires a deep collaborative thinking. This is my central recommendation today. In this webinar, the United States needs to support the creation of a US-ASEAN think tank network. This think tank network would connect the brilliant minds in think tanks across the South Asia with their counterparts in the United States. Its mission would be to conduct research and formulate a comprehensive, multifaceted, and long-term strategy for the U.S. engagement in the region. covering economics, governance, education, technology, and security. An institution like the US-Asia Institute, the ASEAN Center as the ASU, with a deep expertise and connections, is perfectly positioned to become a central hub for this network to champion this idea and help turn it into reality. This is how we can start building a strategy that's a proactive, not reactive. So my conclusion is that the 50 years journey of the US-Vietnam relation is a story of incredible progress. We have moved from enemies to partner, but the next 50 years will be defined by strategic competition to rescue a future of shared prosperity and stability. We need more than just goodwill. We need a real comprehensive strategy. And the formation of this relationship, the diaspora, the Jews, the pupil, to pupil ties is very strong. Now we must build upon it with a strategic vision worthy of the challenges and opportunities ahead. So let's start building that vision together. Thank you. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khoi, for your valuable remarks. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Hoang to make her remarks.
Great. Wow, thank you so much. It's my great honor to participate in our webinar today on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the end of the war in Vietnam and the foundation of the Vietnamese American community, as well as the 30th anniversary of the diplomatic relations with the United States. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the US-Asia Institute for providing me the opportunity to engage in this discussion on education, youth, the Vietnamese diaspora, and the US-Vietnam relation, which I find very close to my heart in both my personal life and my professional career. So today I will explore a couple of interconnected themes that play important roles in shaping the US-Vietnam bilateral relations, the historical foundation of diaspora formation, the generational difference and youth engagement, the transformative power of educational exchange, and the particular case of the Fulbright University Vietnam as a valuable platform for people-to-people diplomacy. And I will speak to you, with all of you as an educator and as a historian of modern Vietnam. So I'm currently teaching at University of California Irvine. And as you all know, UCI is located in Orange County, California. It is the oldest, largest, and most prominent concentrations of Vietnamese refugees outside of Vietnam, with over 200,000 Vietnamese Americans, representing about 10% of the total Vietnamese American population. So unsurprisingly, UC Irvine's undergrad student body has a very significant number of Vietnamese students. Our Vietnamese our Vietnamese Student Associations established in 1979, so among the oldest VSAs in the region. And of course, the Vietnamese is the most popular language offered due to many heritage speakers. So here at UCI, my key classes, including the history of the Vietnam Wars and the Vietnam War into oral history, attract hundreds of students in the past years. And as I strive to educate these young generations of the history of the country, I also learn greatly from my own students, both international and Vietnamese American ones. And I strongly believe that education has the power to shape the values and the attitudes of future generation, fostering a culture of peace and cooperation between the two countries. So today, Vietnamese American youth, not unburdened by the direct trauma of war, but enriched by their bicultural heritage, are pioneering new forms of engagement, from tech startups connecting both economies to cultural festivals that celebrate fusions rather than division. So their success demonstrates that the most profound diplomatic breakthroughs often happened not in the government halls, but in classrooms and in community centers where young minds learn to see former enemies as future partners. So let me first highlight briefly the Vietnamese diaspora history. So 50 years ago, even before the historic moment of the April 30th, 1975 arrived, many government officials, military officials, intellectuals were evacuated in Operation New Life and resettled in concentrated communities across California, Texas, Virginia, and this was known as the first wave of refugees. Now, as the guns fell silent, Vietnam was united and tons of post-war challenges emerged. So from late 1970s to late 1980s, ongoing instability in Vietnam brought a second wave of refugees to the US. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese gambled their lives to escape on overcrowded boats, the so-called boat people, or by land via Cambodia and Thailand. And many never made it. Then in the 1980s to 1990s, the third wave of refugees went through more structured programs like the Orderly Departure Program, or ODP, or the American Homecoming Act. So in all, approximately about 1.6 million refugees were resettled in new homeland across the world between 1975 and 1997, while many more arrived ever since. The Vietnamese diaspora marked by both trauma and extraordinary resilience. Many arrived empty-handed. Many started working in factories, in restaurants, but their children have achieved remarkable educational success. Now their children, the second and the third generation, they now become some of the most influential intellectuals, politicians, business people, entertainers, you name them. It took 50 years to build the community in many little Saigons across America, engaging in politics, commerce, education, media, preserving the Vietnamese language, culture, and history. Yet the Vietnamese American community also faces many issues, often intertwined with the experiences of war trauma, resettlement, intergenerational differences. And I will focus on that particularly. While the first generation have lived through the trauma of war and displacement, maintained strong anti-communist political activism, and preserved history memories of the pre-1975 South Vietnam. Today's young Vietnamese Americans born and raised in America view Vietnam not through the lens of historical grievance, but as a land of opportunity. So over more than 10 years at large public institutions, I have taught a dozen courses as well as study abroad program and have direct connections with a large number of Vietnamese Americans. Many of these students came sit in my office for hours to share their identity crisis, their questions of their family roots, their curiosity of their original homeland, Vietnam. Some of my students now visit Vietnam on their own and told me after their trip about how amazing it was. Besides the authentic foods, right, they do witness the modern Vietnam with interesting people and rich culture. They told me about their great impressions after village and ancestral home visits, the post-war reconstructions. They also see their teaching and economic opportunities, as well as potential works with local organizations addressing education, environment, or social issues. They came back to the US with better Vietnamese skills and desire to engage with contemporary Vietnamese society while developing personal and professional growth in ways that bridge two cultures and historical experiences. I also have Vietnamese American colleagues who were born and grew up here in the US, now go back to Vietnam to work. Despite their family background, and sometimes without permissions from the parents, they decided to establish their career in Vietnam. Some teach at universities, some produce movies and documentaries, some works for consulting groups. So unlike their grandparents and parents' generations, The youth now have a very different view and vision for how the two countries can work together. They approach their ancestral homeland with curiosity, great flexibility, and pragmatic visions for building bridges between two countries they call home. Today's young Vietnamese Americans are more likely to study Vietnamese language and history as tools for global engagement, entrepreneurship, and bridge building. So understanding these intergenerational dynamics is essential to comprehending how involving like identity, memory, and educational priorities directly shape each generation's engagement with both American society and contemporary Vietnam. Youth engagement with the Vietnamese diaspora has become essential connective tissues in this transformative of US-Vietnam relations, from a legacy of war to a foundation for comprehensive partnership. With second and third generation Vietnamese Americans now serve as the cultural interpreters, business facilitators, and policy advocates who possess the unique ability to navigate both societies with authenticities and trust. So in my classes at UC Irvine, I also have international students from Vietnam who represent educational exchanges between the two countries, which has a very rich history in the past 30 years. So as many of you know, currently American student interest in Vietnam has surged with study abroad participation increasing like 15% annually, while Vietnamese students have become the 6th largest international student population in the US, with around 30,000 Vietnamese enrolled at every level of education in 2023. And this creates a dynamic two-way flow of knowledge and cultural exchanges. And indeed, educational exchanges have played a transformative role in US-Vietnam relations, serving as a foundation for deeper cooperation, creating personal connection, building mutual understanding, and developing the human infrastructure necessary for the comprehensive partnership that exists today. What began in early 1990s as a tentative academic exchanges between the former adversaries have evolved into a strong network of educational cooperation. Through programs like Fulbright exchanges, which has brought over thousands of Vietnamese students and scholars to American universities, and the establishment of institutions like Fulbright University Vietnam, education has created what diplomacy alone could not achieve: the mutual understanding and deep-rooted, lasting social change. We started in the early 1990s when education helped break down barriers. In this early period, when political relations were still sensitive, academic partnership provide a safe space for engagement. So joint research projects on topics like the war legacies issues, Agent Orange effects, help address historical grievances through scholarly dialogue. And even before full diplomatic normalizations in 1995, educational exchanges began. The Fulbright program launched in Vietnam in 1992, becoming one of the first major bilateral initiatives. American University started accepting Vietnamese students and creating the first generation of US-educated Vietnamese leaders after the war in the 1990s. In the 2000s, we saw all of the educational exchanges expanded largely via institutional development and capacity building. My generation actually witnessed the process when English language education became a priority and many Vietnamese students enrolled in US universities. In the period of 2000-2016, the Vietnamese Education Foundation, the VEF, provided fellowships for hundreds of Vietnamese students in STEM fields, supported English language training for thousands of Vietnamese faculty, and in the VEF broad lasting alumni network, many fellows became leaders in Vietnam's technology sector. Several started successful companies bridging US-Vietnam business. The decades of 2010s marked the strategic partnership through education as programs like the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, the YSLI, established in 2013, with more than 28,000 young Vietnamese now members of this Young Leaders Initiative network in Vietnam. And especially the Fulbright University Vietnam represents the deepest educational cooperation US universities now also established branch campuses or joint programs in Vietnam. So all these educational exchanges and partnerships have key impacts on human capital development, soft power, mutual understandings, diplomatic foundations. Now, thousands of Vietnamese students educated in the US have returned as leaders in government, business, academia. And these alumni networks facilitated through ongoing bilateral cooperation across sectors. Moreover, now we're all in the digital age, right? So the digital age has enabled Vietnamese universities to partner with US institutions through online learning platforms, allowing the diaspora youth to maintain connections with Vietnam-based peers through social media network and supporting remote research collaborations and virtual cultural exchanges. Now, I would like to highlight one example of the successful Vietnamese-American institutional cooperation, the Fulbright University Vietnam. So the FUV, Fulbright University Vietnam, was established in 2016 as a symbol of bilateral educational cooperation with support from the US government, the Vietnamese government, and the business community. The Fulbright University Vietnam is Vietnam's first private, not-for-profit, liberal arts university. Located in Ho Chi Minh City, it represents a key aspect of the growing educational and people-to-people ties between the two countries. The university aims to provide a high-quality, innovative, and independent education inspired by the American liberal arts model and to foster future leaders in Vietnam. The FUV concept emerged from discussions convened by the Vietnam program at the Harvard Kennedy School aimed at planning the next stage of development of the Fulbright Economics Teaching Program, a center for public policy research and teaching in Ho Chi Minh City. In over 20 years, from 1995 to 2016, this economic teaching program helped to educate new generations of Vietnamese policy makers and public managers and foster a transparent, constructive, and conductive forum for public policy dialogues in Vietnam. At Fulbright University Vietnam, the Vietnamese students were offered an US-style liberal arts and STEM education with a focus on interdisciplinary learning, experiential learning, service learning, and educational exchange. FUV offers substantial financial aid to ensure that socio-economic background doesn't hinder access to education. I had a great opportunity to welcome two FUV presidents and delegations to UCI campus and offer some workshop for FUV students, major in history and Vietnam studies. And in my personal experiences, Fulbright University Vietnam students are among the best in the country, generally considered well-regarded and capable. I'm really impressed with their commitment to Vietnam's development as well. Unlike temporary exchange programs, institutions like the FUV established permanent American educational presence in Vietnam, and it serves as the testing ground for deeper educational collaboration. FUV aims to cultivate future leaders and foster cultural exchange and understanding between the youth of both countries. This includes providing educational opportunities for Vietnamese and American students and faculty for research and exchange. And thus far, many FUV students have had opportunities to study in the US in some joint programs And many US students also went to FEV to learn more about Vietnamese history and culture. Particularly in my own field of history studies, due to sensitive political and historical issues, as both countries still grapple with aspects of their shared history, we started to see a first wave of American students, PhD and historians coming to Vietnam to learn Vietnamese, to explore libraries and archival centers in Vietnam in the 1990s. Since then, we have a lot more American researchers visit Vietnam, but not so much the other way. I'm the Vietnamese first historian trained in both countries, and I hold that record until last year when actually a Fulbright University's Vietnam student now followed my path, and she's current at UC Berkeley. So as I teach history of Vietnam of the war in Vietnam each year, I consistently emphasize to my students that Vietnam represents far more than a conflict. It is a vibrant nation with a rich culture, dynamic economy, and promising future. The flourishing US-Vietnam educational trajectory is shifting toward learning, connection, and hope, rather than remaining anchored in past grievance. So today in classrooms, stretching from California's Vietnamese American community to the bustling University of Ho Chi Minh City, young bridge builders are actively authoring the next chapter of US-Vietnam relations through each lesson they absorb, every friendship they forge across cultures, and all the shared dreams they pursue together, providing that education has the power to heal historical wounds and build lasting connections that politics alone could never construct. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huong, for your very comprehensive remarks. So now that our speakers have had a chance to each make their remarks, we'll proceed to the moderated Q&A session. And to give Dr. Huong a little bit of a break, I'll start with Dr. Khoi with his first question. So I think in his remarks, Dr. Khoi has also mentioned that, we've come a long way in the Vietnam and US relationships over the past 50 years, going from conflict to growing cooperations across multiple areas. But there are still challenges, especially with the recent reductions in foreign aid and lingering divisions from the past, post-war trauma and other issues. So from your perspective as both a research scholar and an educator, what do you think are some key ways, whether through government collaborations, diaspora engagement, or education, that both countries can continue to overcome these obstacles and perhaps strengthening their relationship moving forward?
Oh, thank you, Anh Hoang. That's a so big question. Yeah, that's a big question. I think education is the key element here to transform our relation, the relation between the two countries. I think for example, for the diaspora, the Vietnamese American Jews, from my experience, while the young Vietnamese American Jews may be eager to connect with their heritage in Vietnam through business, to art, culture, tourism, but I feel that just a feeling. I feel that they find their own value incompatible with Vietnamese environment, political environment. So this can limit the depth of their engagement, keep it at a surface level to avoid political complications. So how to overcome this? I think the true reconciliation will lead to a deeper engagement from both sides, and a true reconciliation requires a change in approach from both sides. However, the decisive factor lies with the Vietnamese government, because Vietnamese government is the winner, the power holder. So I think if the Vietnamese government changed their way of approaching, their way of approaching become more open, more liberal, shift from kind of confrontation to dialogue. So it's may creating space for dialogue, tolerating different viewpoints, and it's made create an open space for both sides for a true engagement of the Vietnamese American youth with Vietnam. And basing on that way of approaching, we can realize the capacity of education. As your questions, the true government, Hanoi government and Washington DC's collaboration, the cooperation between the Vietnamese American community and Vietnamese people in Vietnam, and the role of education, that was very important. But I think the barrier that prevent our potential of cooperation is the way we approach each other. So when we change the way we approach each other, so our relationship will be improved. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khoi. I'm mindful of the time, and we also have a section for Q&A with the audience. So allow me to ask this one question to Dr. Huang, and then I'll turn it over back to Tiff to open it up for the audience to ask their questions as well. So Dr. Huang, I think you mentioned in your remarks Fulbright University as a great examples, and also how you've, in your role as an educator at UCI, you've seen many young second generations Vietnamese student eager to return to their motherland, reconnecting with their roots from that way. And, you know, we continue to see that as a positive trend. But as you've also seen, that recent trend has also facing some headwinds. For example, the Fulbright university model, right? It's been very successful in bridging the two countries in terms of education and youth, building youth leadership and people-to-people's connections. But within the current landscape of the U.S. rolling back on its foreign assistance, what do you think are some creative ways that we can lean into other networks, and instead of just counting on the government-to-government relationship and collaborations programs, how can we engage with the broader private sector or like civil society networks or, you know, think tanks and other organizations to continue building platform like the Fulbright universities? I know that they're also currently facing some funding challenges as well. So I would like to dig in further in that example and seek your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. I think that there's a lot of activities or initiatives that we could help cultivate in Vietnam, given the situation of the Fulbright University in Vietnam, even though like we saw that as a very successful example. And I mean, from the bottom of my heart, I really hope that that would be successful in the future. But I know that there's a lot of challenges that they are facing right now. But I think that the youth in general in both Vietnam and in the US too is very, they're young, right? They are very energetic. They have a lot of ideas and the aspiration to develop, and their also commitment to the development of Vietnam. So I think that in a way we could help them by, of course, like education, as I mentioned in my remarks, right? Like definitely education would foster that culture and language and understanding, but also we could establish some kind of youth council, some kind of network that could create some formal, could be government supported council comprising the youth, the young leaders from both countries. We can also develop a more a comprehensive exchange program, like the VEF already like stopped like many years ago, but I hope that some similar exchange program could expand that effort and creating new exchange program focusing on various sectors like education, like business, like technology in the digital age. We also can create some platform. It could be digital platform for civic engagement, some kind of platform that facilitates the ongoing dialogue that we can, like, you know, have all of the we have young participants from both countries sitting together and discuss the future of the relations, and a lot of connection, a lot of friendship, a lot of collaboration. I'm sure that would started right there. So I think that there's ways to create this kind of young professional networks to initiate the dialogue, the discussions, and from then we could hope for other, like, to attract more attentions and also investment from community and from the governments as well.
Yeah, thank you for that thoughtful comments. I know that, for example, the VEF network, they have been able to also, right, the government grant ended, but after the program sunset, they were able to also form this very strong and close-knit alumni networks that still support the future generations of people who'd like to pursue higher education and STEM studies in the US. And now they also launched something that's called the VEF 2.0.
That's right.
Initiative. So yeah, we look forward to having definitely more of those to foster better understanding of both the US and Vietnam sides, and perhaps having future generations of leaders and educators coming to the US as well.
I attended one of that, like VEF 2.0 meetings, and I'm very impressed with the young Vietnamese alumni networks, and they are really like help each other and foster the understanding and connection.
So now with I think 7 minutes left in our agenda, I'd like to open it up, open the floor up for any questions from our attendees to the panelists.
I have a question. My name is Tara Van Toy. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Van Toy, we can hear you.
And of course, I'm a Vietnamese American. I did my PhD here, and I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for almost 30 years before my retirement. So that's my background. So I involved in a lot of the bilateral meeting with Vietnam during my year working at USDA, and also I was an adjunct faculty member at Ohio State University. The question I have for Dr. Huong is that I think you mentioned in 2023 there are 30,000 Vietnamese students in the U.S. university, correct? Yes. So so how do they support themselves? Are they privately supported? 30,000 is a lot of students. So that's the first question. The second question I have is, given the policy of the current administration, getting a visa to come to the US, even to study, is very difficult. So what do you see in the near future related to education or student between Vietnam and US university? That's my two questions.
Yeah, thank you, Go. Yes, is in the past years, and as I mentioned, right, some very brief history of this educational exchange. In the past 30 years, we see a lot more students now coming to the US. Back in the 90s, there was only a few of us. And then 2000s, we witnessed a little bit more because back then, as you know, like there's no internet, there's no, like even email application has to be sent by post, all of that thing. And when we came to the US, and we kind of like, you know, like learn all of this, starting to learn things via internet, that things may be like way easier now when the students in Vietnam now speak better English compared to like several generations before, like several decades before. They also learn a lot more about America. They had a chance to visit America even before they started their study, which is like nothing like that would exist in our generation. So all of these students in the US now, a lot of them got full scholarships from the universities and colleges here in the US. Some of them were supported by some kind of state-owned or organizational grants and scholarships and fellowships. And I would say a lot more students that currently studying in the US now are self-funded. Like a lot of families in Vietnam now think that study abroad, especially studying in the US, is really a great, would definitely a great value for the future of their children, and they would send their children to the US, and not only the US, right? They would send their children to many other countries in the world. For the Vietnamese, education is really important. Well, Vietnamese society as a Confucian society, like strongly influenced by Confucianism. So education had a very special role, and almost everyone, I think everyone, yes, would believe that education would help them to have a better future. And they would invest in their children and in the educational path for their children. A lot of people in Vietnam now would send their kids abroad to study in the US and in other countries in hope that that international degrees help them to have a better life either abroad or in Vietnam. So with the second generation about the future and also the future scenario of all of this, I think Vietnamese still, that a lot of Vietnamese students would still want to study in the US because of the reputation, because of the network, because of all of the quality of education in the US that we have built in the past. And thus far, like a lot of people would just send their application to the US to study. But given the current situation, I think that only temporary, some families would see more challenges to send their kids to the US, and they may switch. I heard actually, I have some personal, I heard some personal stories that people are now switching to send their kids to Europe or to Australia instead of the US, even though the US was actually their first place. But because of the current situation, they're sending their kids elsewhere. But I think that this is only temporary. And so I do hope that after a few years or so, we'll see a lot more Vietnamese students in the US again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Tiffany, do we have time for another questions from the audience, or should we proceed with the closing?
Yeah, unfortunately, we were running out of time, but yeah, I will close it up now. But yes, I'd like to extend our thanks to our panelists for taking the time out of their busy schedules to share their expertise, and to our audience for their participation. While we are out of time for the briefing portion of today's event, if you would like to follow up with any of today's speakers, please reach out to us and we would be happy to assist in fostering further dialogue on the things we discussed today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great day.